Can you define, in your words, what emotional intelligence means to you?
Sure. So the way we think about it is how we reason with and about our emotions. That's the simplest way of, very simple. Of course, that requires skills. And so the model that I've been working on is called Ruler. And Ruler is a set of 5 emotion skills. The first is recognizing emotions. So I'm looking at your facial expression right now. I'm like, is he interested in me or is he judging me? Trying to understand emotions, like,
Yeah.
where's it coming from? Trying to label the emotion with a precise word. That's the R, the U, and the L of Ruler. We talk about that as the experience of emotion, meaning I'm trying to understand what I'm feeling and what the person I'm interacting with is feeling. Then there's the E and the R of Ruler. E is expressing emotions. That's knowing how and when to express emotions with different people across context and culture, because there's lots of differences,
Sure.
in terms of cultural display rules. And then finally, the last R is regulation, the strategies that we use to both manage our own emotions, but help other people to manage theirs.
Yeah, because I think most people know, and I have personally grown up with this idea of IQ and building almost your self-worth around how smart you are, perhaps because it's just a more quantified way of looking at how your brain works and who you are as a person and all that stuff. How would you differentiate the two? And why do you think we've built and have built this importance of IQ, but EQ has been kind of this newer, trendy thing that was not really talked about or even known for me, especially when I grew up?
Yeah, for me neither. Well, you asked like 17 questions in that one.
It's what I do.
So let me think of where to begin. Firstly, we have this thing called IQ. It's not perfect either. It's been studied for, about 100, 125 years, much more established as a set of skills or a set of abilities. It's more, as we say, cognitive abilities. So how we not reason with emotions, but how we reason in general, meaning verbal, propositional kind of stuff. There's what we call verbal IQ and performance IQ. All important, all very predictive of people's success in life. If there's any variable in psychology that is the most predictive, it is IQ. It really does matter. It doesn't explain 100% of your success, but about 20%, which is significant. Now there's emotional intelligence, which is a new set of abilities that was not really talked about or thought about. And I think historically, the reason why that's the case is that emotions were seen as like these private, subjective experiences, right? They're unreliable. Like when you feel emotions, oftentimes people see you as emotional, which means, that it's not something that's good.
Yeah, it's a negative perception to it.
Yeah. Oftentimes people think of even emotional intelligence as being very weak, or not the intelligence, but emotions themselves. So early in psychology's kind of history in the 60s and 70s, like the formal study of emotion really became popular. And you had books by Darwin, that's talked about emotions and essentially asserting that, wait, you got it all wrong, everybody. Emotions have a function. Believe it or not, they ensure your survival. Fear is really important because without fear, you don't know how to get out of the danger. Like it's an actual important emotion. And then emotions are signals. They tell you to approach or to avoid things that might cause you danger. And then people started studying emotions more and more and more. And then in the 1990s, my 2 mentors started thinking about, well, what if there was a way to think about how people could be smart about their feelings? Like, what would that look like? What would we call that thing that, like, people who are just great at reading people's emotions and people who are great at dealing with their emotions, they got triggered, but they just handled it like amazingly well. And that's how the concept of emotional intelligence was formed. And so the formal study of this has only been for about 30 years.
Can you talk to me about how you quantify something like that? So an IQ, you have a bunch of different tests and different variables, and then you can come up with a number that you can quantify so that people can really measure and understand that. How do you go about actually quantifying something like IQ? Is there a number attached to it that people can measure themselves against and try to improve, gamify, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
So once the field became popular, everybody and their mother and their sister and their grandparent and their uncle all got on the bandwagon to try to measure this stuff. Unfortunately, people took the easy route, which is like asking people questions like, hey, Kevin, how emotionally intelligent do you think you are? On a scale from 1 to 5, let me ask you right now. 1, meaning you are emotionally bankrupt. 5, meaning you're like super skilled. Where would you put yourself?
Me?
Yeah.
Depends when you ask me, honestly, but I'd say a 4.
Okay. How do you know?
It's my own perception.
Exactly. Which,
yeah, or what other people have said about me in stressful situations, perhaps.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not, that reliable. If you ask someone how smart they are, it's like, most people say they're smarter than everybody else they know. And so it's not a great way to measure it.
Sure.
Which means that you need to find more objective ways of doing it. And that's kind of what our center has done and others have done too, which is we try to measure it with what we call performance tests. So what that looks like is my team and I spent years videotaping people from different cultural backgrounds, displaying certain emotions, and not like the obvious ones. So not like, show me your happy face and everybody, that big smile.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's cultural differences there, right? If you ask someone, where I work in New Haven, Connecticut versus someone, let's say in Seoul, Korea, to draw a picture of someone who's happy, you would not get the same depiction.
Yeah.
In
Korea is
America,
just this. Just
yeah,
a
you
straight
get
line.
exactly. You go with a gentle smile.
Yes.
Where here you get the big mouth for the teeth and everything.
Right.
Does it mean that Americans are happier than Koreans? No. It just, there is a difference in how we think about expressing those feelings. So we have to take all that into consideration, which is difficult in measurement. With that said, what we've done is we've taken people from various cultural backgrounds. We've brought in experts like myself and others to work with them to display different emotions that we know can be reliably measured. And we have them display those, in video format. And then we create these little clips of people displaying emotions. And then we have people throughout the world look at those facial expressions and determine, is that happy, sad, anger, fear, surprise, disgust? And what we find is that there is variation, that some people are better than others at reading other people's emotions. And there are other things that are interesting to look at too, which are what we might call a positivity or negativity bias. That some people take neutral expressions. Like I'm looking at you right now, and you're kind of you seem mildly pleasant and interested. Just to let you know.
Interested to hear your perspective of my resting bitch face, of like what you really think.
And there are people who look at those resting faces and automatically make them slightly more negative. So they have a negativity bias. It's like, no, you're not calm. You're kind of a little irritated. Versus other people who might have a positivity bias, and they look at you and say, oh no, he's feeling really happy. And that's interesting to know about people, because when you think about it, emotion perception guides so much of our interactions, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you look at someone that you're meeting in a bar, you look at someone you're meeting in a podcast interview, at work, wherever you are, and you're making inferences based on your perception of their emotion state. And the basics are approach or avoid.
Yep.
It's like, oh, I'm seeing slight disgust in that person's facial expression. They don't want to talk to me right now. They think they have more power than me. Versus, a genuine display of happiness or contentment. Oh, they're approachable. They want to listen to me. And I think that we underestimate that power of emotion perception in our daily interactions.
And I would imagine a lot of that is the way we feel about ourselves. So if you're in a bad mood, perhaps the world out there from the external perspective is a little bit less happy, you're a little bit more gloomy. If you're happy, it's the other way around. What is that in reference to quantifying EQ? Is that just, because like, I guess, what does that tell you about someone's emotional intelligence based on whether they perceive something as more negative versus positive?
It's a difficult question. I want to just go back to a minute for what you said, which is that's called an attribution bias. What you're saying is that I am deciding how you feel based on my feelings, which is not very objective. It's like, I'm in a bad mood, therefore everyone else also needs to be in a shitty mood. Like, what's up with that? That's not very, emotionally intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hypothesis would be that people who are higher in emotional intelligence, they would be more aware of how their moods are fluctuating and be more likely in saying, Mark, you're really irritable right now. That does not mean that everybody at work is also irritable. Like, don't project all of your feelings onto everybody else. And that's another piece of self-awareness that's part of emotional intelligence.
Got it. So just the fact that you're aware that you're doing that is a measurement of your emotional intelligence. Got it. For someone listening to this that maybe is along their journey of becoming more emotional intelligent or curious about it, why should someone care about being emotionally intelligent? There's a clear correlation between success and IQ, you mentioned. Why should and how does being emotional intelligence help us with the success in our relationships, career? Can you go about some of the benefits?
Yeah. It's funny because you make me think about, I wrote this book that you probably know about called Permission to Feel. And in that book, I have a chapter. It's called Emotions or Information. And it's the 5 reasons why everybody needs to know about emotions. And it's really I call it my money chapter, because it's all the naysayers in the world, all the CEOs of companies who are like, I don't got time for this. And all the schools that we don't want to do this in our schools.
Sure.
I'm like, you need to read chapter 2. But I say that also because it was the chapter that I had 800 scholarly references for. And the publisher was like, I don't think we can dedicate 50 pages just to one chapter's, references. And I'm like, I need to make this like incontrovertible evidence.
Yeah.
Like, I am done with people having their opinions. Like, everybody can have an opinion, but I want people to really understand the science. And so I advocate for 5 reasons why everybody needs to know about emotional intelligence. The first is that emotions drive our attention. So if you were bored with me right now, you would be struggling, right, in this meeting, in this conversation, because you would go from being curious and engaged to disengaged and bored. And boredom automatically makes your brain go in a different direction. You're like, who's going to be my next guest? I can't wait to talk to the next person, as opposed to enjoying this conversation. Yes. And so being aware of that is really important, whether it's for self-awareness or, like, I do a lot of public speaking. I have to know that how I feel and how the people feel my audience is driving whether or not they're going to want to go deeper with my work. Because that's emotions, right, are what keep us focused, concentrated. And so it's my job as a presenter to understand that and to bring people on an emotional journey that's going to be the most engaging.
Yes.
Just like it's your job in this podcast, right? To make sure that you're asking good questions to keep people who are listening engaged. That's a big one. That's only number 1, though. Number 2 is decision making. People think that they're very objective. They think it's all about their IQ. And I'm like, I've met some really smart people who have made some very dumb choices. I mean, have you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't want to consider myself smart, but I definitely make some bad decisions.
Exactly. And so what we know from research is that emotions are the drivers of our judgments and decision making. How does that work? Well, just think about it. Just put simply, good mood, bad mood. I mean, do you ever notice, that you maybe, if you're in a good mood, you might be more likely to spend money on things than when you're in a bad mood?
Yeah.
It's amazing, right? It's like the weather's bad, the stock market's not doing so great. I'm going to, like, we can't do that today. The next day, it's sunny, the stock market goes up. You're like, let's go shopping. It's like ridiculous, right? Like, any smart person would know, like, day before, day today, whatever, you're like, Like, come on.
Sure.
It's all emotion. It's all mood. The third is relationship quality. And this is a big one because, as I said earlier, emotions drive our willingness to approach or avoid people. And so, I mean, have you ever met someone who was emotionally dysregulated?
Dysregulated meaning?
Like they just didn't handle their feelings well.
They're like explosive one day.
Explosive one day and then down the other day. And
happy.
then they snap back, or they're unpredictable in terms of how they...
Oh, yeah. Got a lot of those people that I've met, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you think about the people in your life who've been emotionally dysregulated, you probably don't think, gosh, I want to spend the rest of my life with those people. Do you?
I want to be careful because I have people in my life that are like that. But in general, yeah, because it throws you off as well.
Yeah. It's difficult. I make a joke about this oftentimes. I have a relative who will remain anonymous. And, this person came to visit me. I used to live in New Hampshire. And I lived in Maine. I lived right on the coast. And I lived in this cute little town. I mean, it couldn't have been cute, a little quintessential New England town. I mean, I used to go to the bakery in the morning for my coffee and my scone. It was like heaven. They were like, would you like a refill? Like, definitely. It was like, everybody was like friendly. And I came from New York City where it was like, like, get out of my way.
Yeah.
People are nice here, but it's a little rough and tumble. Anyhow, this relative of mine comes to visit. We're having a cup of coffee at the bakery. And I'm like, I don't know if I could ever go back to New York City. Like it's like so relaxing here. Everybody's so friendly. And this person looks at me and says, yeah, it's nice here, but there's an underlying anger. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't see that anger, but maybe it's you. And my point here is that people who have that kind of display of emotion, you ever notice that you have to walk in eggshells around them? You have to be careful about what you say because they may get activated. And it's difficult. And I think people just need to be aware of that in general. That how you feel on the inside and the way you show up for people in terms of managing your emotions effectively or ineffectively is driving people to want to be with you or not with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
The fourth reason that we should all care is just mental health. I mean, most people, if you look at all of the diagnoses, that are the most prevalent, it's anxiety disorders, it's depression, it's disorders, of emotion. And we want to be careful to distinguish, everyday emotions from mental illness. But I'm here to say that a lot of our mental health challenges can be prevented if people were to learn the skills of emotional intelligence early in their lives and practice those skills. Because little emotions, when they're not dealt with, become big emotions. And so knowing that I'm feeling sad or down or disappointed and finding ways to manage that can prevent me from feeling despair and hopelessness and depression. Knowing that I'm feeling uncomfortable or uneasy or a little nervous right away and having strategies to deal with that can prevent me from having full-blown anxiety, or a panic attack.
Yep.
And then finally, performance. We talked about IQ earlier. I work at a university where everybody's got high IQ. You can't get in without a high IQ. I think I might have the lowest IQ of everybody I work with. I say that because when I got to Yale back 23 years ago, I was very insecure. I had gone to public schools in New Jersey where I grew up. I never went to a private school. I went to public university. I got my Ph.D. at a public university. And then I was plopped into this Ivy League situation. And I was insecure about it. Because
imposter syndrome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents, didn't read Shakespeare to me. They yelled at me to go to bed. So it was like, this wasn't like, we didn't have really rich conversations at dinner. My father complained about the chicken. It was just we didn't have an intellectually stimulating
Not a
childhood.
very highbrow. Yeah.
No. And so I share that with you because I just assumed everybody's going to be successful. Lo and behold, many of my students don't succeed. And I was like, why is that? And essentially what we found was that it was their lack of emotional intelligence. You know, I always tell my students, your IQ gets you in, but your EQ gets you out.
Interesting.
Because if you don't have, no matter how smart you are, no matter how creative you are, if you can't deal with feedback, like you get really blown away by people's feedback, like you just can't handle, like, I mean, what do you mean you don't like my project? What do you mean it's not good? I thought it was great. Like, why it's all you. Like, no, you need feedback. Let me just give you some, like, it's okay to get feedback. Some people have a really tough time with that.
Yeah.
If you can't handle the anxiety around, is this going to work out or not? If you can't handle if you can't handle the disappointment when things don't work out for you, then no matter how creative you are or how brilliant you are, the emotions will get the best of you.
Yeah, this really resonates with me because in the world of like what I'm in, which is entrepreneurship, there are people that are incredibly smart, incredibly ambitious, and they have this focused vision of what they want to create. Yet at the same time, what happens is they end up building in the trenches without ever actually getting customer feedback. Or even if something is presented to them, they just think their way of building something is the right way to do it instead of actually peeking out into the world and actually getting the feedback. And this happens so often because sometimes people that have like really great ambition and that have been told that they were smart their whole lives think they're right to the point where they never end up building something or creating something that the world actually needs. And I totally resonate with that. And even on a relationship level, when I think about people that I know that you have to walk on eggshells, a lot of them end up building very superficial relationships of people that are just people that are telling them yes and giving them good feedback, not the people that are actually willing to tell them the truth. And it's 100% true. Yeah, it's really really resonates with me, those things that you mentioned. In terms of the malleability of EQ versus IQ, I think in general, like IQ can be improved, but it's kind of what you were born with. It's not really malleable as much. How much is EQ malleable? Because you mentioned it's great to learn as a child, but let's say someone's listening to this at 20, 30, 40 even. How malleable
60,
is
70?
60?
Come
Yeah,
on,
your
don't be
audience,
ageist here.
65, older woman, someone listening to this, how much can they change EQ?
The good news is that it is highly malleable, highly, highly, highly malleable. I always joke, like, Lady Gaga got it wrong. You weren't born this way. And I mean that. Every one of the skills is learned and acquired through experience in life. And it grows as we get older if we practice it. And I think that's very inspiring and hopeful, because if you're not happy with the way you're dealing with your anxiety or your stress, or if you feel like you're just not aware of like how you're feeling on a daily basis, there's hope, because it can really be learned. Even the ability to read emotions, you can practice that skill. You can get feedback on it. Say, hey, Kevin, I'm not sure exactly. Hey, I think you're feeling interested right now, but how's it going? And then you ask the person, you get the feedback. Labeling emotions. I mean, we can't be born with an emotion vocabulary.
Yeah.
You got to learn the words. And it's a beautiful thing to build your emotion vocabulary. I practice it all the time. And, on my social media, I do like the word of the week. And oftentimes I do words from other cultures.
Like different languages, you're saying?
Different languages, yeah. Because English is a limited language.
Yes.
There's some beautiful words in other cultures and languages. So, for example, one of my favorite emotion words, we don't have in English, it's a Sanskrit word called mudita, M-U-D-I-T-A.
Mudita.
And what mudita is we call it sympathetic joy. And essentially what it is that, and this I felt a lot during the pandemic, because I was pretty miserable, and I was I'd take walks and I'd see like the kids playing in the park and they'd be laughing and having fun. I'm like, and I would feel their joy. That's mudita. It's not like I'm feeling the joy. It was like I'm vicariously feeling their joy, and that's bringing me joy.
Oh, interesting.
That's a beautiful experience. And so you have a word for that, and then you can start looking for it in the world around you, which I do quite often.
Yeah.
And I have this like beautiful like moments where I'm just looking around for other people having joy, and instead of being envious of it, I kind of like relish in it.
Whereas perhaps in an English language, we don't really have a word for that. So it's more the internal feelings that you express to the world in terms of joy and laughter. So when you see other people have it, you don't really know how to process that.
Exactly.
Because we don't have a language for it.
Exactly. So giving it a word makes it more, it makes it clearer, in terms of looking for it, talking about it. It doesn't mean that we don't feel it. Like, the one that everybody talks about in psychology is Schadenfreude, which is a German word, which has to do with finding pleasure in someone else's misfortune.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, we don't have a word for that in English, but many of us have watched someone, not do so well, and we're like, yes.
What does that say about the Germans that they have a word for that?
Yeah,
it's the opposite of the Sanskrit.
I'm not in a position to comment on that.
Yeah, listen.
But and so going back to the language acquisition, it makes us better communicators. It gives us better mental models of our experiences. We can build a common language to communicate with other people. And then, expressing emotions. Like, I never was really taught how to express my feelings. I did learn what not to express, which was my mother, for example, was very anxious. And she would say things like, I'm having a nervous breakdown. Leave me alone. I'm going to my room. Like, okay. So if that's all I learned was like, okay, you kind of like have breakdowns and express your anxiety, and then you lock yourself in your room. That's not the best learning opportunity. And my father, who had a lot of anger issues, he'd say like, if I have to tell you one more time, son, if I have to tell you one more time, this is going to be the last time I have to tell you this. And he had a lot of anger and like aggression. And so what I learned, anxiety makes you disappear, or run away, and anger makes you want to attack. There are probably better things I could do with my anger and my anxiety. And so how do we learn how to express emotions in ways that don't freak other people out, don't make other people feel afraid? Because I was essentially trapped with my feelings as a kid because of that. I'm not going to tell mommy that anything's going wrong because she'll have a nervous breakdown. I'm not going to tell daddy because he's going to tell me to toughen up. And, like, who do I think, son, you're not going to get through life. You got to be tough. As a matter of fact, my father once said to me, I'll never forget this. He's like, son, I'm just going to be honest with you. I used to beat kids up like you.
What?
And I'm like, now I think, gosh, Dad, that, where'd you learn that strategy?
Yeah.
And by the way, my father loved me.
I'm sure in his own way, just like my dad and mom did as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, no, what did who was his emotional intelligence coach?
Well, you have empathy now.
I do.
Working in the field.
And knowing that my father's father was an animal, mean. My father has a scar on his arm from when his father took a cigarette and burnt him, putting out his cigarette. So how could my father have ever learned how to healthily display emotions and manage emotions? He didn't have a formal education in this, which is why I've dedicated my career to helping people break those bad cycles and learn healthy ways of dealing with their feelings.
But before you kind of mastered emotional intelligence based on the childhood that you've had, similar to mine in that my parents were very Tiger Asian parents that, were always about discipline. Did you have a lenience of being in an avoidant attachment in terms of relationships and building relationships like that?
Yeah, now I'm clingy.
You're the opposite now.
But yes, I mean, it was unfortunately for me, my childhood also included abuse.
Physical abuse? Or?
Sexual abuse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so my parents' closest friend was a pedophile. And nobody knew about it except me. And so I was abused by him for about 5 years of my childhood. Never talked about it. Going back to my parents, my parents were going through a lot of struggles themselves. And I think as this little boy, I was firstly probably told by the abuser to you can't share this because of all these reasons. I'll hurt you, I'll hurt your family. And growing up in a family where you had kind of anxiety and anger, you're just kind of like, yikes, what's going to happen if I say what happened to me? I didn't want to create more chaos. Unfortunately, that caused me to be in a lot of pain. But there's a beautiful kind of end to this story. My mother's brother, who happened to be a middle school teacher and also a musician, was writing a curriculum to teach kids about feelings. I mean, it really is like one of those fairy tale kind of stories. And he happened to live with us one summer when I was 10, because he was getting his graduate degree near my hometown. And we were sitting in our backyard, and he just started talking to me about emotions and asking me about my emotions and my feelings. And with such a beautiful presence that I finally just shared all the pain I was going through with him. And he didn't say, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown, or he didn't say, you better toughen up. He said, my goodness, we're going to get through this together.
You told him about the actual story.
Yeah. And I will tell you that I am alive and healthy today because of that moment. I was really in a bad place. I was being terribly bullied in school. I was clinically depressed. I had an eating disorder even at 10 years old.
Wow.
I was suffering a lot. And all of a sudden, this amazing human being came into my life and cared about my feelings. Now, I'm going to jump to a little bit of research for a minute.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Of course.
So I had that experience transform my childhood. Someone who was going through what I was going through in the, probably, without that Uncle Marvin intervention, would not be a professor at a place like Yale today, happily married with, I would make a good living. I got great relationships. I feel very psychologically healthy. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means. Don't interview anybody who knows me. But I'm doing pretty well. And so I've been really curious about how many people have an Uncle Marvin or an Aunt Maria or a parent or a grandparent or a coach, a neighbor, whoever it is who creates that permission to feel, which is, my work. And unfortunately, my research shows, and I had a research meeting this morning with my team. We're on our 65th study around the world, studying people in many different places about whether or not they had that Uncle Marvin or not.
Wow.
And I have found that it is very similar across the world. A third of people as adults say they had the Uncle Marvin, 2/3 say they did not.
So much more people don't.
Correct. And when we ask who it was, only half of that third say it was a parent. And some people may be like, oh God, this is who cares? Uncle Marvin, it sounds all fluffy. But I'm here to tell you that as adults, the people who had the Uncle Marvin are much more physically healthy. They are much more emotionally healthy. They have about 20% higher purpose and meaning in life. Their life satisfaction is 15 to 20% higher than those who didn't have the Uncle Marvin. So these early experiences that we have and the people who create the conditions for us to be our true selves are hugely important. And so I'm on this mission, to make sure that everyone has an Uncle Marvin. And what's interesting to me, and I'll stop and then you can ask me some questions about this, is that I present these data. These are new data, but I present them at different conferences that I go to. And people give me pushback. Teachers say, it's not my job to do that, to be, the emotion mentor, the coach for kids. Parents say my job is to, make sure my kid's successful.
Yeah.
And then I show them the data, and then they second guess their belief systems. But here's the most interesting thing to me. when I ask parents in particular, like, what gets in the way? Like, what's the barrier? They say time. I don't have time to do this with my kid. First, I didn't even share the characteristics. The Uncle Marvins have 3 core characteristics. Non-judgmental, good listener, empathic. That's it. They're not problem solvers. They're not brilliant. They're not fixers. They are non-judgmental people who are good listeners and show empathy and compassion. And so for a parent or someone else, I don't have time for that. Like, you don't have time to be compassionate. You don't have time to be a good listener. You don't have time to be non-judgmental. Like, give me a break. But the real deep reason, and the thing that I'm really working to solve for, is that people are afraid to be the Uncle Marvin.
Why is that?
Because they don't have the skills. They don't know what to do. If I say, hey, Kevin, how are you really feeling? And you say, Mark, I'm actually feeling hopeless right now. It freaks the adults out because they've never had an emotion education. So they don't know how to handle that intense feeling that their child or their student or their whoever may be feeling. And then I say to the parents or the teachers, well, what are the repercussions here? So what's the alternative? Like suppression, repression, denial. You're telling me right now that you'd rather your kid who might be anxious to never talk about it because you're uncomfortable talking about it. The whole thing. We need this is why I have a lot of years left to work.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like it's this negative flywheel because the parents were never able to deal with the emotions, whether something traumatic has happened to them or not. They just don't have the emotional intelligence to deal with the experience. It means that the child doesn't, and then their child is also not going to have that. And it just becomes this generational thing. Like, our family, our last name is not the types of people that talk about their emotions and are sensitive, and just leads to this thing.
That's right.
Yeah, it's can be a very powerful way to unwire that if you learn the skills, but it can also mean you have a generation of people that can't deal with that stuff as well.
And it's a workplace too, by the way. I do this research in companies. Do you feel like you have an emotional support person? And people misperceive it. They think it's all about Mark's going to come into my office and spill all of his feelings for 3 hours, and it's going to, we're going to lose productivity. Nobody wants to do that, number one. Number two, it's not one of our recommendations.
Yeah.
It's but people, right? If you're working with someone who's not doing their job well and you're frustrated, sometimes you need to talk to someone about it and get feedback about how you can either remove that person from the project or give that person feedback to help them be more productive. But it's people, everybody's a little nervous about when it comes to feelings, and I want to get rid of that nervousness.
Yeah. And I think one of the points that I want to discuss is the difference between emotional suppression versus what we talked about, which is emotional regulation. Because from the outside, perhaps it looks similar. Someone that is suppressing their emotions seems like they've got their shit together.
They are regulating.
And somewhat they're regulating whatever from the outside. But internally, there's a lot of stuff that they're dealing with that they can't even share. And I think in my culture, I've been raised to certainly suppress those emotions, almost run away from it, because it just, from a collectivism culture in Asia, you align with the group, so you don't lash out or you don't stand out amongst the other groups. What is the difference between those two for people that may mistakenly believe just suppressing it and not thinking about it is regulating?
So I think it's important to say that certain strategies are more or less helpful. And by the way, suppression is not always unhelpful. If you are someone who gets easily frightened at a movie, and there's some scary shit going on, no, I don't want to see it. It's not going to hurt you to not look at it, right? That's suppression a little bit.
Yes.
And so that's fine. If you're in a marriage and you're having uncomfortable feelings about your spouse and you're suppressing them for 5 years, my hunch is that your sex life is not going to be so good. My hunch is that you're going to feel empty on the inside, and you're going to be very dissatisfied in your life.
Yeah.
And so it's about really understanding how these strategies work. Not to be too much of a self-promoter, but my forthcoming book is called Dealing with Feeling.
Coming soon.
Yeah, September.
Beauty.
Just finished up my final edits. But that was, book number 1 is called Permission to Feel. It's really funny. And I say that because people are like, Marc, thank you for giving me permission to feel. And I learned so much about why emotions matter. But now what the heck do I do with all these feelings? So I'm like, all right, I'll figure it out.
Let's do it.
And so just giving you a little bit of, forward about that, it's like I find this so interesting because all methods for regulating or managing emotions can be helpful or unhelpful. So for example, you could be like exercises. I love to work out. I used to be a martial arts teacher. I taught Korean martial art called Hapkido.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I have a 5th degree black belt in Hapkido.
Wow.
So you can call me Subhumnim. And so for me, martial arts and other physical activity works. I can't tell you that you should do Hapkido. You can do whatever you want as long as you move. But if you move too much, maybe you have a little bit of obsession, you might have a disorder. If you the only thing you do is spend 5 hours out on the treadmill, my hunch is that's leading to some mental health challenges.
Why is that? Is that because you're...
Because you're going to maybe have anorexia or something.
Oh, I see.
In terms of there's just so many hours a day you should be on the treadmill.
Sure.
And so it can lead to, and you see people in the gym, you can feel it almost as if they're using that as an escape strategy.
Yeah, that happens.
Yep. Food, food we know influences mood. Food is what keeps us alive. And food can also be something that we abuse. And, we can over-caffeinate, we can drink alcohol, we can overeat fats and salts and sugars, which puts us in a very unhealthy place. Breathing is a big strategy. Everybody likes to breathe. I always joke about that because it's like, everybody take a deep breath. It's like, okay, I've done that. I still can't stand you.
Yeah, some people are just, you can't breathe away.
And so, yes, and meditation and mindfulness are wonderful strategies. As someone who spent many years of his life going on meditation retreats, I will tell you that a large percentage of the people on those retreats were hiding their depression.
Huh.
They were retreating from the real world and going to meditation. And what they really needed to do was have the courage to get out in the world and ask for the promotion or ask the person out on the date. And so they were using that as a way of escaping. And I share that because it's just important to know that all strategies can be helpful or unhelpful depending on how we use them. Let me stop there because that's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good. We'll definitely dig deeper into that. But for people that maybe don't know the consequences of it, for someone that has not been able to deal with their emotions over a long period of time, what are the consequences? Like what happens? How does it show up? How do we show up in the world, in our workplace, in our relationships, when we are not able to eventually deal with some of the traumas and the emotional baggage that we have?
It goes back to those 5 things that I spoke about earlier: attention, memory, learning, decisions, relationships, health, and performance. All of those suffer. If you can't deal with your stress and anxiety as a student in school, you're not going to be a good learner. Or you're not going to be able to focus at work. If you can't deal with your emotions in healthy ways, you're going to make very poor choices for yourself around all things, whether it be relationships, eating, etc. Third is, I can promise you, if you cannot manage your emotions effectively, you are going to have very challenging relationships because people aren't going to want to be around you. They're not going to trust you. The fourth is just going back to that mental health piece. It's preventative. When you have skills in regulating emotions, you are less likely, and we know this from the research, to have anxiety or depression or other challenges. And finally, and this is a big one, I believe that most people who don't achieve their dreams in life, it's as a result of them not being able to regulate their emotions.
Explain.
Because so much of our ability to achieve what we want out of life comes from having the ability to deal with all the emotions that are part of that journey. I think about my own career. I mean, I've been, blasted by people of certain political backgrounds who tell me that I'm a proselytizer of certain values. I have had CEOs of companies, laugh at me saying, Mark, like, this is all fluffy stuff. Like, look at me, look at my office. I'm in the corner office on the Hudson River bringing in $5 trillion a year. Do I really need emotional intelligence? And I'm like, well, I just interviewed the people who work for you and they hate you, but
one of them's going to quit, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there goes your productivity.
Right.
And how much more successful could you be if the people actually enjoyed working with you because you're so dysregulated? And I just think people underestimate, especially for people who are like entrepreneurs or who are highly creative people. My gosh, like if you're trying to invent something in today's world and you don't have resilience, like I don't know how you'll do it. Because, I mean, I think about actors. I interviewed an actor recently and she says, Mark, I'm a young actress. I've determined that I'm going to be an actress for the next 60 years of my life. She's only in her 20s. And I've also realized that I'm going to get rejected more than I get the parts that I want. And I'm just going to adopt this attitude that rejection is part of the journey. And I'm going to not feel my feelings. But what's going to happen is that I am going to, if I don't get the part, I'm going to process it. And then I'm going to let it go. And I'm also going to think about the person who busted their butt to get the part and feel, happy for them. And know that I'm not going to stop interviewing or auditioning. And I just thought it was a beautiful way, of tackling what is going to be probably a career of a lot of rejection.
Yeah. It's just to have that perspective beforehand versus someone that probably had such high expectations of getting this role because they fantasize about the car they can buy, the house they can buy, the fame they're going to have.
Exactly.
The moment they get rejected, they're just crushed. Yeah. And it's hard for them to get back into their emotional stability, to get back into the race again.
Correct. And I've been pushed recently, in our society right now about, like people who are bullies are highly successful. And I say, it is true. The bully can reach a high degree of success, but they're going to die very, very, very lonely.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about how the way we feel oftentimes attracts the perceptions we have and perhaps even the people. I remember I'm still dealing with my own stuff, obviously, but certainly not having dealt with that in my early 20s, I've noticed that I was just more attracted to other people that had a bit more of a dark side, perhaps you could say a bit more of a toxicity side. And I knew that internally, but it was like, I can relate somewhat to these people. And then as I started to heal and just process my own stuff, when I see the same people, it doesn't do much for me anymore. In my head, I'm just like, this is too much work. It's just like, I know the stuff the journey that I had to go through. So to be able to do that, even try to do that for someone else that may not even be open to doing that, it's just a lot of work. And that for me was a fundamental shift in my head. I was like, oh, wow, like I'm the same person technically, but just because of the way I process my emotions, I'm also starting to attract different people in my life.
Well, you're not the same person.
True, yeah.
It's funny you say that. So I have this niece who is just so near and dear to my heart. She, her name is Esme, and she gives me permission to always talk about her. But so she's adopted from Guatemala, and I'm proud to say that her mom and I went together to bring her back. This is 20 years ago now, and her mom also has gone on a journey of developing her emotional intelligence, and I've been involved, obviously, in the family. This is like 2 days ago. I'm on the phone with her mom, and she says to me, Mark, I got to just tell you what Esme said to me. They're not going to believe it. So Esme's in college and she's in a sorority. And she called her mom and she's like, Mom, I'm having such an awareness right now. It is really difficult to be around people who have not had an emotion education. And like,
So
I was like,
interesting.
yes.
Wow.
You know?
That's how you know. It's just like, yep.
And she said, it is hard to accept that people have not like learned how to deal with their emotions. She's been growing up with me as her uncle, and we've had so many instances of her. She was bullied and we worked through that. She had a little speech impediment when she was early. We worked through that. She was rejected at a camp that she went to. We worked through that. She had difficulty her first year of college. We worked through that. And she's been processing emotions and learning healthy strategies to deal with them her whole life. And so she's just aware now of like her own feelings, but also monitoring the people around her, and recognizes like, wow, like they didn't have Uncle Mark in their life to help them regulate, or a good mom.
Yeah.
And so it does make a difference.
For the people that don't have an Uncle Marvin, that have baggage and dark experiences that they've gone through, how can we wholeheartedly accept who we are as individuals if there are uncomfortable past experiences that are just too difficult to even think about?
Mm-hmm. It's an important question. Firstly, I probably should have shared that one of the core principles of my work is that there is no such thing as a bad emotion. Emotions are experiences. We're human beings. We're going to be fearful. Sometimes we're going to be sad. Sometimes we're going to feel depressed. Sometimes we're going to feel grief. Sometimes we're going to be overwhelmed. It's all okay. There's somehow a weird belief in society that when I'm feeling a strong, unpleasant emotion, I can't be a good lover. I can't be productive at work. Unfounded. You can be. So I think radical self-acceptance in terms of giving oneself permission to feel is at the top of the hierarchy in terms of what needs to happen first.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, all of this is learned. And that's really refreshing for people because, oh, you mean I can actually learn and practice new ways of dealing with my feelings that'll help me grow? Yes, yes, yes. It's funny you say this about this whole permission to feel. Like, what if you didn't have the Uncle Marvin? So a while back, I was giving a speech here in New York City, and one of my friends was in town. And I'm like, you've never seen me present. You got to come. Like, just you get front row, free tickets. It was a free talk anyway, but whatever. And so he's sitting in the front row, and at the end, we're walking out, and he's like, dude, like that blew my mind. I'm like, what do you mean it blew your mind? He's like, in a bad way. I'm like, in a bad way? Everybody else gave me a standing ovation. He's like, I didn't have an Uncle Marvin. Now I realize why I'm struggling and I don't really feel clear about my purpose in life. I'm like, oh, shit. Like, that wasn't my goal, to make people feel that way. And it really opened me up to being clear in the way I present this. There's no guarantee, going backwards. If you didn't have the Uncle Marvin, you didn't have the Uncle Marvin. But a couple of things that people need to know. One, we can be Uncle Marvins to ourselves. And I just think the world would be a really different place if people had some self-compassion, if people were less judgmental when they looked in the mirror, and if people just had better listening to their own voices in their heads in terms of what their needs are and working towards those goals. That's number one. For those of you who are listening, you can be your own Uncle Marvin. But there's something I think even more powerful than that, which is helpful. And it goes back to another story I'm just going to share. So I'm giving this speech in another area of the United States. And all of a sudden, this guy jumps out of the audience like, are you talking about Marvin Moore, the 6th grade social studies teacher from Monticello, New York? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, Mark, you're not going to believe this, but your Uncle Marvin was my Uncle Marvin.
No way. The same person?
Yes.
Oh my God.
And he says, your uncle was my teacher 45 years ago. And he is the reason why I'm a superintendent of education right now.
Wow.
And I said, I can't believe this. Like, I've never met one of my uncle's actual own students because Uncle Marvin and I really worked on our things together after he had retired. Anyhow, I said to him, like, thank you, like, really excited to meet you, but I got to finish my speech.
Yeah.
Can I talk to you afterward? I interviewed this guy for 45 minutes. He was probably like 57 years old,
Mm.
because he had my uncle when he was 12 as a teacher. And this guy spent 45 minutes describing my uncle as if I were describing him.
Huh.
The twinkle in your uncle's eyes, his facial expression, the way he taught, the warmth. I mean, all these things. The real reason I'm telling you that story is that at the end, he looks at me and he's like, obviously your uncle had a huge impact on you, Mark. And I said, 100%. And he says, well, so I'm just curious, for whom are you an Uncle Marvin? And I just, I almost started crying because I'm like, I'm a scientist. I like to do the research. I don't want to practice this stuff. And it was very eye-opening for me about how I'm paying it forward. The kind of colleague I am, the kind of husband I am, the kind of, friend I am. And it's changed me in terms of just that one moment of realizing, Mark, this isn't just about your research. You got to live this too. And I share that because of other research, which is when you show up for people as the Uncle Marvin, when you give that non-judgment, when you are that listener, when you show that empathy and compassion, it is visceral. Like you can feel it in the relationship. You can feel the impact it has on lightening people up and making them feel safe and trusted and warm and comfortable with you. And when you witness that impact you have on people, it has a reciprocal effect on your own health and wellness. And something even on top of that is that when other people are watching it happen, it benefits them too.
Right. What was the Sanskrit word that you mentioned?
Mudita.
Mudita.
Yeah.
Just when you feel joy,
you
can live vicariously.
When you are the
else.
observer of someone else experiencing the benefits of the Uncle Marvin, you actually get a benefit yourself.
I want to just quickly go through some of the common emotions that people have.
Sure.
Maybe you said there's no bad emotions. So I don't want to say bad. So emotions that people have, and just try to help people understand. For example, jealousy was something that I've struggled with in particularly romantic relationships. Not jealousy in terms of like friend success, or that's probably more envy, I guess.
Good.
But jealousy was something I struggled, and I didn't really know how to process that, particularly in initial times. And then I understood that it wasn't like, it was certainly out of being self-conscious about something, but I didn't know where the insecurity came from. And I started to understand that it's really the fear of losing someone. And that, for whatever reason, made me feel better, because it just kind of helped me understand, like, I care about this person and I'm probably afraid of losing them for whatever reason. Maybe it's for who I am, or maybe it's because I don't feel I'm good enough, whatever it might be. And that just really helped me, just even understanding it, not even knowing how to solve it. Maybe it would start with anxiety. Where does anxiety come from? Where's the root of that? And help us understand like why we feel that.
That's a great place to start in terms of anxiety, because it's the number one emotion that people say they're feeling these days, which, by the way, might not be the actual emotion they're feeling, but it's the term that's the most common. 5 years ago, it wasn't anxiety, it was stress. I'm stressed. Now nobody says they're stressed. Everybody says they're anxious. And neither may be right or wrong. Anxiety is about uncertainty. We get anxious when we don't feel we have control over the future. So I always go back to the pandemic. I'm sitting at home. All of a sudden, the university shut down. All of a sudden, the stock market's crashing. And my team is like, what's happening? What's happening? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I can't make any predictions. I'm not the CDC. I'm not the president of the university. I don't run the stock market. I'm just sitting here having the same feelings as you, which are like, I can't predict anything. That's anxiety. It's different than stress. Stress is when you have too many demands and not enough resources. So the example I give there is that at the same time that the pandemic is happening, everybody's freaking out. I'm getting thousands of emails from people as a psychologist. What do I do with all these feelings? I can't handle myself. Schools, we're shutting down. Companies, help us. I wasn't anxious about that. I was stressed. because I had way too much stuff coming at me and I didn't have the ability to deal with it. That's stress. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
And then there's fear, which is a real legitimate danger. So I joke about this, but I live in the countryside of Connecticut, like in the mountains.
Yeah.
And we're going out. I'm working in my home office right after we bought our home, which we bought during the pandemic. And all of a sudden I look out the window, there's a bobcat. I'm like, we're dead. What the heck did we do here? Like, this is I used to live, right down by the university. I decided I'm going to be a country boy. And then it's like, what do I know about bobcats? I'm like freaked out. Like, dogs are going to be killed. We're never moving. We're moving. We're selling the house. Soon I learned pretty much how to deal with the bobcats. It was not that big of a deal. But my immediate reaction was, I'm dead.
Yeah.
That's fear, not anxiety, not stress. Do you see what I'm getting at here?
It's in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a perception of danger. Another example would be like, you're at home, you're relaxed, it's 2:00 in the morning, and someone opens the door to your house. That's not anxiety. That's fear. Like, what the hell? Like, I'm scared I'm going to be mugged or shot or robbed or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. So anxiety oftentimes then it's these thoughts or fears that we have that have not actually happened or that we potentially may think it might happen, but it's really our own psychological dealings with it.
Well, importantly, all emotions are that way. Their emotions are created. You're not born with these emotions. Just like mudita is a word that I just gave you now that you have in your lexicon.
Yes, I'm going to use
That's
it all
a
the
new
time
experience.
Mudita. Yeah.
All emotions are that way. We have decided as a field of psychology and others that like the experience of uncertainty and inability to predict the future equals anxiety, impending danger, we're going to call that fear. Too many demands, not enough resources, we're going to call that stress. But importantly, everybody has different thresholds. The things that might make you feel upset or angry might not make me feel that way at all. And that's okay, because we all can't feel the same reasons or the same feelings for the same reasons. But I've got to learn to understand what makes you feel the way you do so I can be a good friend.
Yes. You brought up the story of feeling imposter syndrome, which I definitely resonate with, especially starting out and interviewing great people, great thought leaders, or even having success of my own, not thinking that I deserve it because I didn't come from a family of money. Where is imposter syndrome coming from? What is the root of that? And how should we process it? Like, how did you get over your own imposter syndrome?
I'm not sure we ever get over it. I think that we manage it better. I notice it and I'm like, Mark, objectively, you're doing pretty good. And I just talk to myself in a more compassionate way when I feel that way.
Is it a healthy emotion, you think, to feel some imposter syndrome? Like, I think about Nietzsche and how he talks about like all great men are play actors to their own ideals. Like, we're performers of the things that we want to be great at, to what we idealize it to. And I think about sometimes what I feel of like kind of restricting myself in some ways because of the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Well, that's where we have to become, as I call it, emotion scientists about our lives. Just approach it with curiosity, not judgment. There's nothing to judge. This is how you feel. Feelings are feelings. And so when I get that way, when I get insecure, when I see someone with more followers or I see someone who presents in a way like, oh, wow, they're really good. I just observe it and I think, Mark, are you doing what brings you the most joy in life? Yeah, you are. Do you want to spend X number of hours a day posting on social media? No. Do you want to be doing more research? Yes. Okay. So just
process it.
Process it. And don't judge it. It's okay to feel imposter syndrome. Just don't allow it to have power over you.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel anxious. I feel anxious. I think I was born with anxiety, and I've had anxiety my whole life. I worry about why I worry. I even worry about why I worry about why I worry.
It's just a never-ending cycle, right? It's like,
and then I'm like, Mark, stop worrying. You got nothing to worry about. But like my natural tendency is to go in that direction.
Yeah.
And then I just observe it. And I'm like, Mark, how about, why don't we switch to gratitude? Look at your apartment. Look at your lifestyle. You're doing pretty well.
Powerful. I know we're running out of time, so I want to kind of end it off with something that is obviously in the sphere of the world that we live in today in terms of technology, which is AI.
Sure.
And one of the ways that people are using AI, including friends of mine, are this kind of AI friend, buddy, some would say mental help therapist, assistant. I think you mentioned that a lot of people need Uncle Marvins in their lives because people are lonely. They don't have the people that they can talk to. What's your honest opinion in terms of how AI could play a role in helping people with mental health? Do you think it does a net positive to society when we have something like that?
Yeah. My first response before you finish your sentence was, it's the end of the world as we know it. But
everyone's going to be healed.
Yes. I do. I'm actually presenting at a big conference on AI and EI. I'm doing the EI meets AI or AI meets EI. I think that AI can be helpful to help people find strategies, to crowdsource ideas for what to do with their feelings. But we have to practice those in the real world with real people. My biggest fear is that people will become more isolated and more lonely because they'll get more attached to the device.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was asked to do consulting on a device that was about mental health and home device that people would talk to. I won't mention, but you kind of you probably know where I'm going. And I got really I kind of bowed out of the project because I didn't want to be responsible for building a device that made people attached to it. Because we're born to be socially connected. We can't survive as a species without being in relationship with other people. And so as long as the technologies are helping people to figure out how to navigate their actual lives, their social lives, their emotional lives, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I think about my niece who is pretty much grown up with an iPad at this point. And if she's at a library, my mom's telling her that she's looking for a computer. She's looking for anything that is what she believes is familiar, not books. And I think about like how her EQ is going to evolve as she goes into high school and college, compared to myself where I had a flip phone until I was like 16. How do you think that evolves to the kids in our generation and where that's going?
It does impact their development. We know that. There's research to support it. Again, I think, my biggest fear around AI and technology around dealing with loneliness and well-being is that, it's hard to be in a relationship. I've been with my partner for 30 years. And so we've had some serious ups and downs, and I feel very connected. But it is work to stay in a good relationship, to talk honestly about how you feel, to ask for love and support and all the dynamics that go on. And you can't do that with AI. You can maybe practice it, but unless it's pushing you to get out in the world and do it, my biggest fear is around that space, and in particular, just to be blunt, around intimacy.
Yeah.
People are becoming less intimate, like hugging and kissing. And let's be real, making love is a good thing. I don't think AI can help you, in that space. I think that we have to push people to get out of their discomfort and give them strategies to get out in the world and be free that way.
Yeah, because the thing I worry about is the one-sided nature of an AI relationship with another human. Because you open your phone, the AI is there. It's going to compliment you.
Yeah.
You're there. It's there to serve you. So you can extract some of the things that you're dealing with, but you never really learn how to empathize. You don't really learn how to listen. You're really just that one-sided relationship.
Yeah.
Like I saw this ad about what is like your perfect AI girlfriend or AI boyfriend? Well, it's just like someone that can just compliment you, someone that can just bring you food, someone that can just listen to you all day and every day. It's like an AI robot. That's pretty much where the future is heading, right? It's like, it's ridiculous.
Well, I think it would be helpful, for AI to do some role playing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm having a really difficult moment with my husband, my wife, my colleague. Can you role play with me the difficult conversation I want to have? I love that idea.
I just don't think people are going to do it. Like, why? Why would they do it?
Well,
right?
they'd have to be motivated. They have to be taught that that's a pathway towards practicing how to have the difficult conversations and then do it in the real world.
Yeah.
But, I will be bowing out of my career the day that people have AI relationships, because then I'll feel like I've failed completely.
It's coming soon. I mean, it's crazy what's happening these days.
It's coming soon, but we're going to fight against it.
Yeah.
We need to help people navigate their lives in the real world.
Well, hey, Marc, I know I can talk to you for hours about this stuff, but I want to also end it on a positive note before we let people know where to find you. Like, what are some of the fundamental truths that you've learned that people can use to either process and regulate their emotions? Something that's a takeaway that can help to either regulate themselves, their emotions themselves, or to help someone else regulate emotions.
I'm going to go back to that, the core of permission to feel, which is, in my research thus far, that's the most powerful strategy. So when I wrote Permission to Feel, people are like, well, now you give me permission to feel, what do I do with my feelings? I said, you're not really paying attention. It's about giving yourself permission to feel. That is a strategy. And so just having that radical self-acceptance that I am a feelings person, I'm having strong feelings right now, those feelings don't have to have power over me. That is a really important step in having greater well-being. All the other strategies are important too. The breathing exercises, the meditation, the social support systems, the eating healthy, the sleeping well, all of that matters. But if we don't have that fundamental shift in our attitudes about ourselves and our emotions, the rest won't follow. That to me is number one.
Beautiful. Where can people find you, Marc?
I think the easiest is my website, which is my name, which is Marc Brackett, www.marc, M-A-R-C, Brackett, B-R-A-C-K-E-T-T.com, and links to websites, other websites, links to social media. I do mostly Instagram and LinkedIn these days. I want to just also put a plug in for an app that I built. So the co-founder of Pinterest and I and our respective teams built an app that's called How We Feel that is now been used by about 50 million people. Thanks to generous donations, it's available for free on both iOS and Android. We won a big award from Apple a couple of years ago.
Amazing.
And it's basically an app to build emotional self-awareness. So just check it out on Android or iOS. It's How We Feel. And, obviously they can, if they're interested in reading, I've got my book, Permission to Feel, and my forthcoming book called Dealing with Feeling. Beautiful.
Well, we'll have you back for that one for a longer conversation, and we'll have everything linked down below for you guys to check out. Thanks so much, Marc.
Thank you.
Perfect. Bye, everybody.